Hey, how are you feeling?
I feel like somebody who has been living under the conditions I've been living under and pouring caffeine on top of it in addition to all of that. So
Thanks.
I guess that's to say, feel a little, mm,
Yeah,
kind of buzzy, rattled, jangled a bit.
that sounds right.
Yeah.
How are you
And,
handling that?
huh?
How are you handling that?
Um, Most of the time I'm handling it pretty good. I've had one or two times where I've gotten, or maybe three or four times where I've gotten a bit impatient or frustrated. I mean, I've never done or said anything where I walk away from it feeling really awful because
Hmm.
I was um, over the line in some way. Uh, but what I now am beginning to understand and see in a way that I hadn't all previous time before this, that in those situations, it's nothing more than reacting to the feeling in the body. It's not reacting to the thought, it's reacting to the feeling in the body. That is the fundamental basement level foundation. Everything else is on top of that. And I see that. And
Wonderful.
but it's that process of getting to where you can see it when it's happening, which has happened a few times. There have been a few
Hmm.
times here and there where in the moment something's happening, there's been a reaction, and then there's an awareness, oh, that's about this feeling that's happening in this general
Yep.
region.
Yep.
And so far, what that results in is just kind of a sort of care or caution about not overreacting, not letting that
Mhm.
provoke uh, person processes of anger or frustration or yelling or any of the usual things that can often results in with most people.
Yeah.
So there's this, I guess you might call it um, it's not really quite the right word, but the closest I can get is it's kind of it seems like a sort of a suppressive mechanism to keep things in check so that nothing is said or done that there's regret about after the fact.
Yep.
And that's okay because I know in time that will eventually evolve into something else. Right now it's just a question of being able to see that physical feeling in real time as it's happening, and then the other things that you've explained to me repeatedly over all this time will eventually come into play. Those will eventually start to become active.
Yeah.
So I'm not hard on myself. I don't beat myself up. I don't walk away from these situations going, God, you should have done better, or why did you,
Yep.
or why didn't you?
Yep.
Um, Usually it's more a case of, well, I'm really glad that I didn't raise my voice, or I'm really glad I
Yep.
didn't say something mean-spirited. I'm glad I didn't retaliate. Um, and there's a recognition that you know this will eventually evolve and develop and improve, although there is some desire for things to be different. I guess what it is there's this awareness that that sensation can or those sensations can happen in the body, and we don't have to react to them because they're not necessarily bad.
Yep.
They're not inherently bad or wrong or anything like that. Um, so there's no need to call out a self tribunal or anything. Uh, but still there is that desire to be able to do what I know is possible, which is for those sensations to come up, and whatever thoughts are associated with them, those can come up too. And there's not any kind of reaction. There's just an awareness. Oh, okay, there's that feeling in the body. Oh, there's all those thoughts. Hi, good to see you again. No big deal, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it's spot on. You're doing exactly the right thing. We've talked about this before, but the closer you can get to recognizing it in the moment, the more, transformative, like quickly transformative the whole thing becomes. Because you're exactly right that the sensations themselves, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing inherently negative about them. We just have an association has been built up that as soon as we feel those, we eject into some sort of a reaction. But it doesn't have to be that way. And it's not because the sensations are so inherently awful that there's nothing else to do about it. We just have to relearn that there's another option. And it's really about that becoming more and more aware in the moment when these triggering experiences happen, that it's like the triggering experience itself, instead of launching us into the reactivity that we would normally have, instead it becomes the clue or the trigger to launch us into the inquiry or into the introspection to feel what's actually happening there. And it's sort of like just, re conditioning the system to bump in towards, introspection instead of external
Reaction.
reaction. Exactly. I'm curious though, your we talked about this about, like you mentioned this in the email a bit. And I wonder if it's related to that. The things that happen in life which cause that, you know, the most kind of reactive triggering, the most triggering of those primary sensations. There's something usually kind of similar about situations that tend to trigger us. They usually have like a common denominator. So, what is it about the places that you currently find yourself being triggered in ways where thankfully you're not, outwardly acting on it like you once would, but I'm curious about the the arising of that discomfort in the first place.
Um, yeah, that's something I have been, I've thought about, I have reflected on, and I don't know if there is such a thing. I don't know if this is the final answer,
Mhm.
but this is what I've come up with so far. It seems to be about a couple of things. It seems to be about this strong need for things to be just or fair. And that's not just exclusively for me. I mean,
Mhm.
I can get pretty wound up if something is unjust or unfair for someone else. I
Yeah,
mean, that happens every bit as much as having a reaction to something being unfair or unjust to me.
yeah.
So there's that, this isn't just, this isn't fair, this isn't right reaction. And then there's also this this may not be the best way to describe it, but this is how it's shown up in words so far is an inability to be okay or be at peace with powerlessness and helplessness. And I think I've mentioned this before.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, yeah. We've
and
talked.
that really is a big one. I mean, um, and it's funny what kinds of things can set it off. We were watching something last night, Susanna and I, um, and in the show, there was something that happened that was really just patently, truly unjust in the actual sense of the word. I mean, it was,
Ew.
a situation of legal manipulation to stop somebody from being able to do something to find out who had committed this really awful act,
Yeah,
um, and to try to bring uh, whichever party to justice. And it's funny because normally I don't really get caught up in TV shows. I mean, my willing suspension of disbelief isn't what it once was for whatever
yeah,
reason.
yeah.
But last night it really kind of managed to poke the bear, as people like to say. And then after we turned it off and we're getting ready for bed, Susanna said something, and that was already active. And then I wound up reacting. I was kind of short or testy with her, and it wasn't really about her. It was about that this make believe situation that
Yeah.
was about this thing that is really a real kind of hot button issue for me.
Yep. So it's so interesting. And I know we've talked about this before, but we can always tackle the feeling of powerlessness from multiple different angles. But the first, because you brought it up, I'm curious. So you're watching the show. What are
Hmm.
you feeling in the body at the moment when you're seeing this injustice being performed? And then I'm curious, what was going on over the course of the next hour or whatever it was before you were then testy with Susanna or short with Susanna? Because clearly this was a lingering thing. It wasn't just that you saw the TV, it was there, you felt it, it was gone, and then you have an interaction with Susanna. There are lingering tendrils of that has to have to be there that would,
Hmm.
cause you to react out of that even later.
Right.
So what was your experience while watching it and then after having watched it? Were you still thinking about it? Was that still creating a undercurrent of that sensation in the body?
What happened was the events on the show created feelings in the body. So there was this somatic activity, and of course, because of the context of the show, there are thoughts about it which frame the feeling.
Yeah.
Because that feeling, as you and I both know, can be very easily associated with other things. It just depends on the thoughts and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
context that it's all happening in. So in
Uh-huh.
this case, the feeling is being taken as about this thing that is unjust.
Yeah.
And now keep in mind that the space of time this happened in was pretty short because that was right as we were getting ready to shut it off, and then we got ready for bed. And so within, say, inside of 30 minutes, we were going, we had lights off and we're going to sleep. So in that span of 30 minutes, Susanna um, was asking me about various things that had to do with, she was having a hard time sleeping the night before because first it was really hot during the night, and she got up and it was cold in the house, and it's a situation that there's only so much I can do about it. I
Mhm.
mean, I really, I mean, I can do one thing or the other thing. It's incredibly limited. And she's just going to have to make do with one thing or the other. There's going to be some kind of compromise, and that's going to result in something that's not preferable.
Mhm.
So meanwhile, that's bodily sensation is still there, kind of simmering away, and she's bringing up this issue, and it's one, it just feels like too much. It just, I guess that's the best way to put it. Just hard to be clear about it now after the fact, but it seemed like it felt like it was too much. It was just, there are requests and needs all day long, and here we go. It's almost time for bed, and there's this feeling in the body, and there's this thing that there's only so much I can do about it, which I guess brings us back to the powerless or helpless issue.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
um, so that on top of this tense, uncomfortable feeling in the body, um, led to being, um, kind of impatient, kind of short.
Mm. Yeah, it's so interesting. Multiple different things. So first of all, when you're watching the show, one of the important things to recognize is that yeah, probably on a base level, most people would watch the show and agree that there was a sense of injustice about what happened or something in that case. But it is particularly relevant to you, right? When you have
Mhm.
that, because you have that feeling of powerlessness, and because it's not just some abstraction that you remember from being a child, it's something that you feel regularly every day at different points in your day.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
have to drop what you're doing and take Tuesday where she wants to go. Susanna needs something and you have to drop what you're doing and do that. There are so many times in the day when this is an active thing for you that your framing watching that show wasn't, look at the furniture or admire the plants in the background or, the makeup job that the makeup artist did or whatever. It You picked up the relevant part was that you felt in some way connected to that feeling of powerlessness or the injustice of being in a powerless situation. So that became like a magnifying glass. So yeah, in some way it sparked the sensation in the body, but I suspect it also was sort of reinforcing the thing that you have been feeling for months or years. And so it's not just that particular scene that causes, because if it was, those sensations in the body tend not to last very long. You have you're in traffic and somebody, doesn't let you in and you feel like, oh, we're supposed to be nice to each other and they were supposed to let me in. And then like, some seconds later, it's really gone unless you're constantly talking about that jerk who wouldn't let you in and making a whole thing out of it. But if you're not intentionally or even subconsciously doing that where you're replaying the story over and over again and oh that character shouldn't have and that was so bad that what's probably happening is that this is something which is like an undercurrent of sensation a lot. It's being triggered over and over again, and it might be under the threshold where you don't even recognize it most of the time.
Hmm.
But that is a particular instance where it's highlighted. And then again, the fact that it lasted after you turned off the TV and it was still there churning around means it wasn't just from that show. There's other stuff that is stimulating that. Some of it might be actually external, some of it might be thoughts about the external situation that you're in. But I think this is playing into it
Hmm.
more than you might be aware.
When you say this is playing into it, what is this?
Yeah, the kind of undercurrent of having that sense of powerlessness or injustice that's shaping your view of the current experience. Because even just when you came on this morning, I mean, the first thing was, I asked how you were doing, and you said for somebody who's, been going through all of the stuff that you've been going through and also caffeinated, to be expected. But that implies that there is this kind of ordeal that's being undertaken. There is a sense of, and it's true in some ways, but it's also just to see that it's not a, clean experience, if we can call it that, that it's also colored by these older feelings of powerlessness and even injustice that you're the one who has to when Tuesday doesn't and Susanna can't. And those things can build on, even if they're not explicitly expressed, verbally or even thought all the time. That can be a lingering resentment or at least belief that's undercurrent an undercurrent of the system.
Now, is that with regards to whatever the origin of these things are, or are you referring to just what's current with
Well,
regard?
both,
Okay.
because you it's like how do I say that? I don't know, new metaphor might not be a good one. We'll see how it goes. It's like it's like if as a child you got, poked in one eye and you lost sight in that eye. Now,
Mhm.
you still don't have depth perception, right? Because you need two eyes for proper depth perception. We could go back and we can say that the fact that you can't tell where the stairs end and begin now is because you got poked in the eye once when you were 5 and it damaged your eye and you lost it. But the fact is now you don't have depth perception because that eye is not currently functioning, right? So
Okay.
there's we might be able to go back to some point and say, yes, well, when Darrell was at such and such an age, he started developing this habit of belief in being, you know, uh, powerless and not having agency and all of that, and not feeling like he could take care of himself or he had to try to protect himself or whatever the story was. But the fact is that that then just sets up a conditioning where that becomes the go-to. You if you have poked an eye out when you were 5, you never have that depth perception that you would have had
Right.
if you had two eyes. If you have started seeing life through one filter of powerlessness, or that becomes a prevailing recurring theme in your life, it's going to be a prevailing recurring theme in your life. So we can't go back to when you were a child and actively change that then. So
Right.
to look at, well, how is that lack of depth perception or how is that belief in my own powerlessness and the injustice of that manifesting now? And that is so we're effectively doing, all of that at this point. This is a metaphor for what happened then because this is relevant now. So it's both the cause, if we want to say that, of why things are the way they are, but it's also the result. It's both cause and effect at the same time.
Hmm. I don't know if this is important, useful, whatever. One of the things I've noticed that tends to set that reaction in motion because there's a lot of the time, particularly with Susanna, but also with Tuesday as well, where somebody needs something, there's a request, there's a demand, whatever, and it's really not a big deal. And
Mhm.
it's nothing. It's just
Yep.
something that's happening and it's very transient, comes and goes. But if there is an attachment, this idea about doing something, whether it's I feel like I simply want to, or there's more um, a stronger feeling of I need to,
Yep.
um, and then there's that intention to do X, and then somebody's needs um, interfere with that. That's where that reaction most likely will wind up rearing its head.
Yeah. So we have on one side the kind of craving and aversion practice, right? Because there's the I want to do
Hmm.
this, but some other factor in life is intervening.
Right.
In one way, we can just bring it down to that attachment for wanting things to be different than they are. I would like to build a pedal right now, and yet,
Hmm.
Tuesday needs something, and so I feel in me this division or this friction because there is a pull that would like for my day to be set up where I have the next 6 uninterrupted hours to do this. But the reality of the day is I have a family member who actually needs something else from me. And then there's this disconnect or again, this friction of, well, which one takes priority? And you probably, what you are experiencing is um, this whole, basically, I think if we use the neuroscience explanation of this, there are basically all of these different brain networks which are creating different alternatives of what we might do in this situation, right? There's going to be a possibility of just saying, nope, screw you, I'm doing what I wanted to do and ignoring it because that is theoretically a possibility, right? Probably not the best one, but it's not that you are completely unable to say no or that you are completely unable to just lock the door and sit there and do what you want to do, right? There are patterns of behavior in morality and all of that that are factoring in that are saying, oh, but that's not the nice thing to do. It's not the kind thing to do. It's not the responsible thing. I wouldn't want to be a person who does that. All of those
Right.
different levels of identification and moral, because there's the identification of who would I be if I was doing that. I wouldn't like myself if I was. I wouldn't want to be if
Right.
you have levels of morality, but also identification built into that choice of not to do it, or of not to just take your 6 hours to yourself and do what you want to do. On the other hand, you also have but I want to make the people in my life happy and provide them the things that they need. And, you probably have some altruistic pull towards that as well. And
Mhm.
then looking at, does what I want to do right now, does that match up to the same level of necessity as what Susanna needs me to do? Okay, well, her needing to help her move up the stairs to do whatever the thing is more important right now in my estimation than that. But all of these calculations are happening in the brain, right? Under the surface, subconsciously. And all of this is being weighed out. You're feeling sensations in the body which are being triggered by all of these different, interplays that are happening. The insula is picking up on all of this, and so all of this stuff is going on. So what you're actually feeling in that moment of like, disturbance of not knowing what to do and feeling uncomfortable about it is this kind of internal. uh, dissonance between what you think you want to do and what you really want to do, because there is no one Darrell who wants to do or doesn't want to do one of those things. It's basically being in the middle of like a committee arguing back and forth about something, and you're sitting there in the middle of the turmoil.
Yeah.
Right? So you're witnessing the turmoil of waiting for a decision to happen, in essence, and feeling that discomfort of not really knowing, you know, what the right thing to do is at that point. Now that, because we're not privy to all of the inner workings of the brain and the bodily senses and all of that. We just feel that in this moment, when I'm faced with a choice, I feel uncomfortable about it. There's something here which I want to do this thing, but I kind of also want to do that thing, or I don't want to do this thing, but I kind of have to do that, or whatever it is. That is felt as a sense of dissonance, you know. And then we interpret that as being, well, but it's either from the injustice standpoint, or, but I have to do the thing, or those are interpretations which are coming on afterwards to make sense of this discomfort that you're feeling just for being in a state of kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an internal division. You
Yeah.
want to do something, or you feel like you need to do something, and something else is calling you to do that. And there's an internal division and dissonance about which one of those takes priority, which one is actually going to happen. But that
Right.
choice is not being made consciously with, the free will agency of Darrell in all its glory.
Right.
So having a moment to, when you are in that situation, basically, funny because I'm I'm about to invoke what sounds like the free will agent to do the thing in that moment, but here hopefully that it's not that. But if you can kind of like get used to, let's say this, I'm planting the seed that hopefully the next time that happens, another option that you experience is to, instead of just feeling that sense of injustice, or feeling put upon that you have to do this thing when you want to do something else, you can take a moment and breathe. You can take a moment to not initially do one thing or the other, but just
Mhm.
feel what it feels like in that moment of dissonance, that moment of internal division, and recognize that the the decision to move, the decision to do one thing or not is happening on its own either way, right? You're basically
Right.
waiting to see what the outcome is going to be. The the thoughts that come up afterwards about, oh, but now I'm moving to go take Tuesday someplace, and I would like to be doing this other thing, or I still need to do this other thing. Those thoughts are no longer relevant or helpful. Those thoughts are maintaining an idea about what you would have wanted to do had reality been in a different, had you been living in a different timeline. That's an irrelevant bit of information at this moment, because what you actually wanted to do, all things considered, right? The one that won out because it was either morally or identifiably the stronger option, was to go take Tuesday to do, to go someplace. The thoughts that make the victim afterwards are not relevant to the situation.
Because the if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is that the real desire, the thing that is that Darrell is really being called to do, is whatever decision is made.
Yeah, that one is the one that won out. The other one was a possibility that you never really had the option, or the ability or opportunity to fill in that moment. It was a hypothetical that the brain created, but it wasn't the one that won out because that wasn't really the option that you could have taken.
So it's kind of, I don't know, comical that if it happens, that there's this feeling of upset about not being able to do this other thing because that other thing wasn't what was chosen. So that's not where the real desire or intention or conditioning is even pointing to.
Exactly. You never had the opportunity to sit there for the next 6 hours and build a pedal because your conditioning has led you to be somebody who will take Tuesday to where she needs to go.
Well,
And
and it's, I don't know if this is, if how important this is in um, the scheme you're describing, but when it comes to doing anything for Susanna, no matter how small, um, there is a profound level of commitment to those things because, and I've told her this more than once over this last year because we've been dealing with all of this stuff since February of last year, so we're getting close to a year.
yeah,
And I've told her that when we made a commitment to be together, this is prior to even actually getting legally married. This was a conversation we had prior to that. Um, that that commitment I made, that promise I made, was um, that's ironclad, written in stone.
yeah,
It was never anything that I was going to um, disregard or put aside if it wasn't convenient or what have you. It's no, I said I would, so
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
be damned if I'm not.
yep,
And so that's been the case this last year and even beyond, but especially this last year of, she needs something and she'll feel bad, she'll apologize. I'm like, you don't have anything to apologize for. I
yeah,
told you I would be here for you. I'm
yep.
here,
That's
and so
wonderful.
that's, try to imagine the level of priority that has in terms of somehow residing in the networks of the brain.
Yeah,
I mean, that's, if you think about the way that, like, the tables when it comes to programming computers and such, that's the one that,
yeah,
if true, that's
yeah,
the one
yeah,
that
yeah,
provides everything
yep,
else.
yep. Well, and that's it. And that's, as I understand it, it's largely the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is it has that idea of the thing which, is kind of like our the goal that we have put in mind. That's like our underlying belief in that regard. And it's trying to keep everything you know, in that flow. The other parts that might chime in to suggest other options and to weigh them out and to, create the sense of identification around them and all of that are kind of, counterbalances and other yeah, creative elements of interacting with the environment. But again, it's a matter of the conditioning that has led up to this moment only really allows for, one of those things to win. And again, it's not a personal choice. Like
Right.
it's not a, you really figuring it out or really deciding to do the thing. You can't take credit and you can't take blame for it.
So you were talking earlier, or right at the beginning of all of that, about um, planting the seed of this new
Yeah.
thing that can happen. And you're talking about, something happens, and then pause and breathe. If you would please
Yeah.
describe that idea, that seed that you're trying to plant, explain that again so that I have
Yeah.
that clearly understood.
Yeah. Because the way that we normally go through life, it's like, you know, okay, I'm going to go do this thing for now. And then somebody asks you to do something and you get that like that kind of moment of pause. And it's like, oh, but I was going to do that. And then there's this internal moment of turbulence where it's like, am I still going to keep on one trajectory or do I go and do the other thing? And what I want you to do is to, in that moment, just stop because there's probably going to be thoughts chiming in saying, oh, but I should also, especially like you said to begin with, that it's this is particularly relevant when there's something that you need to do and then also somebody else who needs you to do something else. So there's that sense that you have something which is important and not necessarily even a self enjoyable kind of thing. It's like, the dog is going to poop on the floor if I don't take him for a walk right now. Have to do this thing. But then also Susanna needs something else. And there's that moment of pull of which one of those is going to win out.
Mhm.
Take that moment to just breathe. So you stop instead of immediately launching into one of the two acts. You stop for just a second and you breathe and you feel what is happening in the body and see if you can become aware of all of those flashing panorama of thoughts. I mean, it's just going to be this like, cascade of probably thoughts about, but if I don't, then the dog is going to move, but if I don't, then Susanna's going to move. And all of these things are going to ping pong really fast back and forth. And then also you're feeling this kind of internal turbulence inside. And I want you to just become aware that without the feeling that you are consciously choosing one of these actions, that
Hmm.
something just clicks and you find yourself in motion doing
Hmm.
one of the two actions. It's really having that like, oh, and now I'm off to, help Susanna and I'll get to the dog in 2 minutes. Whatever the thing is, I want you to be really aware of that moment of non-choice that still leads to the action happening, but specifically what it feels like in the body. Because again, the body is going to react with some sort of turbulence in any moment when you feel like you have to make a decision. But because of your conditioning, you're going to reinterpret that sensation as being something different. I should say everybody's going to interpret that potentially as something different. So you might have that feeling of powerlessness. I was supposed to do this one thing that I don't even want to do, and now I'm being dragged to do something else that I want to do even less, maybe. But here I am, right? So here's poor little me who's stuck in the middle, who can't do anything that he wants because he's torn in so many other directions. So take a moment to recognize that that interpretation is being overlaid on those sensations, on that sensation of you know turbulence about which one of those two things you're going to do. There's sort of that third thought that comes in, or that overarching extra kind of interpretation, which says, I am, really the victim in this situation now. I am powerless because I am at the whim of somebody else's needs.
Okay.
And notice if that is playing into that same sensation. If that is something which is, it's almost like co-opting that sensation for its own benefit. And and then also,
Hmm.
what is that actually doing? What is it providing you? In one case, it
Huh.
might be that it's coming from, just the history of having felt like that over and over again, and it becomes a conditioned response that you feel is in the body, and the thought of being powerless comes up. But it's also important to notice if it is providing you with anything, a feeling of identity as the powerless victim, which can bring with itself a certain sense of, power and um, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but it has its own uh, enjoyment isn't quite the right word, but it's like you feel like you derive some sense of identity out of it, some sense of familiarity, some sense of comfort, some sense of yeah, it can even be like a weird, power in being powerless that we take on.
Or
So
oh, poor me.
yeah, exactly. And it's coming from that, right? So you get, not saying you necessarily, but maybe, but people tend to derive something from that too. So then being aware, what do you benefit? What do you enjoy? What helps you by maintaining that sense of poor me on top of this very clearly autonomous situation where you are either acting or not acting?
It reminds me, just kind of a supporting statement. For anyone who's familiar with him, it reminds me of something that I once heard Ajahn Suchito say about how that when it comes to a sense of self, that the mind will choose a unpleasant, uncomfortable, or even painful sense of self rather than not have a sense of self at all. And he
Mm.
said that the most solid, reliable, and most, I think can't remember if I think we used the word something like concretized
Hmm.
sense of self is the negative sense of self.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Really good.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, those everything you're saying and that idea all kind of support each other. It all they shore each other up. I mean, and I think everyone has seen it either with themselves or someone else. Through the process of this kind of work that um, not everyone, but a lot of people go through a place where not having a sense of self is really scary as hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they'll have a really unpleasant, uncomfortable, painful sense of self rather than not have any sense of self at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely true. It's also, I mean, the whole point of doing this work is finding all the different ways that identification is lurking in different
Mm,
aspects of our living, our daily life. We tend to think of them as being initially the more obvious, like, I am my body, I am funny, I am so many years old,
mhm,
all of those things. But really, it's in these little, much more subtle interactions, both with others, but also with the mind, that we create this sense of identification that I am a good person who is, putting himself last all the time and taking care of those around him. That is a sense of identification that is being
mhm.
derived from having that ideal of myself, I can look at myself in the mirror and feel okay, right? Because I know I did the best thing I could. That is a sense of identification. But like you said,
Yeah.
it's just as much also to be, poor me. I'm always the victim. I, can never do the things that I want. I always have to be there for others. I can't say no. All of those are also another type of identification. And they're just as much self-reinforcing and beneficial to the ego as being having a really grandiose sense of self, and really believing that you are the most and the best and everybody should look up to you. It's all coming from that same starting point of needing that identification. I need to define myself in some way, both to others and to me. So I know where I stand in the world, among other people, in comparison to other people, in comparison to how I was a month ago or years ago. And we're constantly doing that game of, yeah, but I'm less reactive now than I used to be, right? I'm better, I'm
Mhm.
more awake now than I used to be. I'm a, a better person now than I used to be. It's all um, in the effort to maintain that sense of identification as one who is improving, as opposed to one who is getting progressively worse by the day, right? We're always lost in this layer of identification after layer of identification.
So it seems it's like identification is lurking under every single stone in the forest itself.
It is. It is.
Jeez. And the thought that has come up many times in the last few months or so has been um, what you had said about how all things are inherently neutral. And
Mm.
there have been times where something happens and there's a reaction to it, the kinds of things we've been talking about. I really don't want to do that, or that's not right, or whatever.
Right.
And there's this awareness of, well, that's inherently neutral. Why is this a problem?
Mm.
So it seems like the thing that the sticking point in that is the tendency towards identification.
Yeah, and the identification of the one who can imagine things being other than they are, and then believing that that is a possibility or that was ever a possibility,
Mm,
right?
yeah, there's that again.
Yeah. Also, this is where, I feel like it's super important to always bring in both sides of reality, right? The absolute and the relative. We have to constantly keep this in mind
Uh,
because it's also possible to take these things on and allow yourself to be this completely, flaccid doormat of a person who is just right run all over. And it's not, the point isn't to become
Right.
completely much of a pushover that everybody just walks all over you and takes advantage.
You,
So it's finding that balance of where you are having a clear sense of boundary of what is okay and what isn't. And it also, some of this work is going to be reconditioning. Find if we were somebody who didn't have that to begin with, we have to find what that actually means. And there isn't a universally agreed upon demarcation of that where that boundary should be. It's going to be different for everybody. We all have our own moral standings that say this is up to a point, and then beyond that is unacceptable. And the amount of where I feel like giving becomes taking, and vice versa. So my go-to, I think we've said this before, but my go-to definition is like a need that you have to you know maintain is anything that if you don't do this, it will cause you mental, physical, or emotional harm. There are certain things that if you don't fulfill those, it will be detrimental mentally, physically, or emotionally to the body. Basically, everything else is a preference.
makes a note of that. So you said anything that causes harm.
Anything which if you don't do, right? So it's
Okay.
a need is anything which if you disregard it, if you don't fulfill that, it will cause physical, mental, or emotional harm to this being.
Physical, mental, or emotional. Okay.
If you don't eat, you will, or don't eat nutritious foods or whatever, it will cause harm to the body. If you are in a state where, you are doing so much for others that you are not sleeping and you are, making yourself sick and stressed all the time and all of those things, that is unhealthy to, the emotional state, the physical state. If you are somebody who is, super prone to anxiety, for instance, and your boundary is going to be different because it's like you can do, up to a point where that if you, your boundary of emotional distress might kick in a lot sooner than somebody else's.
Right.
And so being aware of that and respecting that is important.
Well, it's funny that you brought that up, and the reason for the excitement, the physical expression of excitement that you probably noticed was because that was one of the very things I wanted to ask you about, because that
Yeah.
I keep running into that over the last 4, 8, 12 weeks. I don't know
Yeah.
how long it's been going on, but something will happen, and there are these ideas now that will come up and kind of get run through almost sort of kind of a Rolodex of thoughts associated with the work and the practice. And, okay, well, so this thing's coming up. There's a unpleasant feeling in the body in response to that. And along with that are some thoughts, and they reinforce that, and so feel resistance to doing X. And well, but this is inherently neutral, so why is this a problem? Oh, well,
Yeah.
why does this have to be a problem? That's another
Yeah.
one of the questions that gets asked frequently. And like, well, okay, well, if this is inherently neutral and the only reason it's a problem is because of this conditioning, and that can all be set aside, how far how far when it comes to setting things aside, how far is too far? When does it come to the point of being a doormat? That's exactly the question. Is when does this lead to becoming a doormat or a pushover? And
Yeah.
I have not been able to answer that question. So the definition of what a need is, it's not a perfect 100% definition, but it at least begins to give a good solid outline of where the line might get drawn.
Yeah. Well, and the line is going to move, right? It's
Yeah,
not
I
because there
figures.
is an inherent line.
Hmm.
Every person is going to it's going to be different, and it's going to be different as you develop different capacities. As you're,
Sure.
yeah, like earlier on in life, before we do any craving or aversion practice, the line is probably going to be pretty close. We're going to be emotionally, damaged in some for some of us, pretty early on, or, the more we have resilience and openness, and the more we can
Mm.
um, be free of like I was thinking I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we were talking about how it can be difficult for some people when they start to kind of wake up and they start to have these recognitions that people's stories aren't really as real as they think they are. You know, so then we have these interactions with people in daily basis, and so much of our normal interaction with others, especially when we know them, is kind of like boosting them up or validating their interpretation of their negative experiences. I think we all have people in our lives that, like, when we talk to them, it's mostly them complaining about all the things that are wrong in their lives, and us saying, "Yeah, yeah, you're right. It's such a terrible situation. Yeah, you should be really angry about that, and I would be over there stomping." And we kind of play into their story and like amp it up and make them feel good. And that can be a lot of human interaction. And when you
Mm.
start to realize that those stories are not based on anything objectively true, that the person, yes, they have had their interaction with the sales clerk at blah blah blah, and they got really irritated about it, but you can see that their their responses were probably not really commensurate with the severity of the situation.
Hmm.
That you can see how it's conditioning playing against conditioning. You can see how there is no actual separate that person from the other person in the situation, and how the whole thing is one big unified, happening. And depending on your level of awareness and awakeness and all of that, you might notice that all of that seems kind of funny. And so when you're in an experience with somebody or an interaction with somebody, it can be, I would say, like at a certain point in our kind of spiritual progression, there's a point where it becomes hard to interact with people like that, because you
Hmm.
kind of get into your own head about it, and you start to maybe even judge the other person about being caught up in their own shit when
Well, it's
you
hard
know
to take it
yourself. And
seriously.
yeah, huh?
It's hard to take it seriously. They want you to
Yeah.
get upset and like this is comical. Why would I can't take this seriously at all?
Exactly. So that can happen, but I think what also can happen, maybe even a little bit later, is that you are available. And this was what I was saying to the person, is I remember there was a point some years ago where it was like I didn't, I had done a lot of the craving and aversion work, and things just felt really good. And I had people in my life who every time I would talk to them, it was like just a litany of all the things that were going wrong, and they would just vent. And I was fine. I would just be there, and I felt like I was just there. So it was like being like a HEPA filter or something. It was like everything would just kind of like spew out of them, and it would just come through and just clean it out. And like, okay, so I could just be there, and they could vent, and it didn't feel like anything was sticking on me. It didn't feel like there was any, right? So I think we have the ability also to meet people where they are, to be with them, to let them have their experience as it is, because we also can't chime in and say, oh, but that's really not, what you're describing isn't really real. It didn't really
No,
happen the way
that's
you
not
think
going
it.
to fly.
No. So, so we have to be compassionate to where people are, but
Hmm.
also we can have that sense of openness in our experience, that realize that that person over there who is living this life, which feels completely real, completely identified, completely miserable, they can vent all they want, and it doesn't touch anything here. This can be just open space, which provides that openness for everything to happen. So, from that perspective, then, you might be in a position where you have a lot more bandwidth to spare with other people than you do at other times in your life. So that boundary of when to say no, I need my space, might be way different than it was before having that sense of openness, right? Um, so it really has to be a person to person, moment to moment kind of recognition that if I do this thing now, it is going to be too much. And, I'm really going to suffer some negative consequences for it. So in that moment, I can just say no. And I also want to just chime in before I forget, because I had already forgotten, but it came back. Like when you said that there might be a situation where, oh God, it's slipping again. Where, oh no, like I can feel it, like there was, like I can see an image of you there and it's dwindling. But it was about being able to say no to somebody. Um, I wish I could remember exactly how you phrased it. But the takeaway is that it is possible to, because it was when you were saying about being, when you were kind of in the confusion of not knowing whether it was, okay to say no in this point or not.
What about being a doormat or a pushover?
Yeah, it was around that period. But the takeaway is that it is okay to feel, um because you said, like, if you feel it in the body and you feel, oh crap, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, the takeaway is that even if you feel that um you have to say no, you can say no without there being any attachment to that. It was something about what you were saying about, like, about having an attachment to the thing.
Oh,
See if I can rephrase it in a way that makes sense without that as the lead in. Um,
okay.
we can feel somebody asks us to take them to the airport at 4 a.m. and you can feel in you that it is just going to be absolutely unthinkable for you, right?
Mhm.
And you can respect the fact that that is just because of your biology right now, because of everything. It is completely, you are going to be, probably have an accident on the way home because you're going to be so out of it.
All right.
So to say no can be done cleanly,
Hmm.
meaning in you, if you really feel that you know your boundaries, and you really know without question that this thing is just one of those unthinkable no's, you can say that without any residual feeling of, guilt or uh, resistance or uh, um, that thing again that I can't think of the word of for, like internal friction about it. Do you know what I'm saying? So
I think you used the word dissonance earlier, I
dissonance,
believe.
yeah, that's a good word for it. Thanks. So thank you for that. So, do you understand what I'm saying? So it's like,
I do.
okay,
I understand what you're saying. The tricky part or the part that's unclear is how do you do that? Because that's the thing that I don't know if I've had that experience yet. I may have, and I just can't recall it. But saying no is something that there's seems like there's always, even if it's very small amount of it, seems like there's this um, sort of discomfort or second guessing myself or
hmm,
regret or feeling bad about it, something along those lines.
yeah, and which is normal, but notice when that happens, what um what is priming those sensations of
Oh.
dissonance, regret, right? Again, is
Hmm.
it the I feel bad because now my, that self-identity is harmed a little bit. It doesn't, I would love to be the person who says yes to everybody and is completely, selfless and completely just giving, 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 and I'm not. And that feels uncomfortable that I'm not living up to what I would like to be.
I think in my case, what's more often um, what comes up more often than anything else is it's some variation of the "you're the bad guy" theme,
Mhm. Yep.
you know, and that whole "you're the bad guy" theme somehow is worked into the approval or disapproval of others.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And as we've talked about, there is no way to sustain yourself based on the approval of others.
right.
And there's no way to really ultimately harm yourself based on the disapproval of others. That is it's an internal mm, an internal reification or an internal you have to take that that dissatisfaction that you think or that you interpret you're getting from somebody else. And you have to make that about you in a way that makes it both personal and real, and then also like is interpreted as into feeling, into an actuality. Because it,
I'm not sure I follow you on that.
yeah. So if a person thinks, oh, Darrell, such a selfish ass, couldn't even take me to the airport at 4 a.m. Ugh, you can hear those words,
Hmm.
but it is just a thought, right? Even if
Right.
you translate it to hearing it in your own mind, thinking it, even thinking, yeah, I am I am a selfish person. I am not getting up at 3 a.m. to take them to the airport by 4 a.m. In you, you're going to feel some sensations in response to that.
Right.
But none of that immediately becomes about you unless it's really taken on.
Hmm.
How do I break this down? So to have the thought in the mind that I am selfish for not taking them to the airport at 4 a.m., that can stop at the pure direct experience of sound in the mind.
Oh,
Blah 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 blah. It could stop there, but it
right.
really doesn't because there's an identification with the content of that thought. The content of the thought is implying a person who is selfish for a specific reason. That content is pointing to a belief in a being here who is a certain way. And it's especially believed because it conforms to previous held identifications of that being.
Mm.
That being is bad. That being is selfish. That being is fill in the blank.
Hmm.
That is not implied directly, even by somebody saying the words, Darrell is a selfish ass. That has to be in you, interpreted into who that Darrell is, who is being determined as being selfish. What selfish means to you, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think there are some politicians in the world right now who believe selfish is really a admirable trait, right? You have to, for you, have a sense that selfishness is bad. And I don't want to be one of those selfish people. And I feel bad that other people might see me as being selfish because I don't want to see me as being selfish. It hurts my personal interpretation of me to think of myself in that view. So all of that is layer upon layer upon layer of identification, which is turned inwards based on a supposition about a thing which you still cannot find,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it is those really silly when we see them, but so insidious because we usually don't notice them, types of identification that are constantly making everything feel real and pertinent to us. And when I say that that other person out there can't make us feel that way, it's because they can't invoke the sense of self. They can't
Right.
create your sense of self. They can't create your sense of being not good enough or a bad guy or any of that. That has to be an internal feeling which is sparked based on previous experiences of having that same feeling.
Right.
So we need to effectively, be able to interrupt that process from happening.
Hmm.
And a large part of that starts when we just become aware that it is just a process happening. Recognize when, like you said, you are concerned a lot about how other people view you in that way. So, however you are hearing or seeing that mental representation of what you think they are thinking about you, stop at that moment that you first notice it. Do you know what I mean? So, give me a situation when you might be concerned about how other people are viewing you.
Well, it's funny because as you're saying this, it's bringing to mind something that happened in the last week. I can't recall the specifics. All I remember is that um, Tuesday wanted me to take her somewhere. I had some resistance to it because of just the need to kind of draw the line. I guess was really what was at work more than anything else.
Yeah.
She was upset because I was drawing a boundary of, it's the end of the world. My head's on fire. We got to go now. It's like, no,
Yeah.
this is not an emergency. We'll go as soon as I'm ready.
Yeah.
Um, and really, it was done for no other reason than just to try to kind of put a stop to her. Just like I said, the world's ending. My head's on fire. We got to go
Yeah.
now. There's not any real emergency. It's just how she chooses to see it. And so I'm just trying to kind of contain this low level craziness, keep
Yeah.
it at a distance. That upset her. I could imagine, and there you go. There's the opera phrase. I could imagine
Yeah.
the things that she was thinking, how she was seeing me, and probably how she was bitching and moaning either to her mom or her boyfriend about my, you know, saying, "Not now. We'll get to it in a little while when I'm ready."
Yeah.
um, so that was a situation that happened, and I was very aware of the fact that she was probably having these thoughts, and um, it's here we go again. I'm the bad guy.
Yeah.
I'm everything would be fine if it weren't for me.
Yeah.
Which that happens so consistently, so reliably that I don't know if I can think of a time when there was a situation when that wasn't the
Mm.
basic thought happening, the basic program running.
Yeah.
So,
So in that moment, it doesn't even sound like she necessarily, maybe she said something that kind of implied that to you. The
well, she was pissed off, and that's
yeah.
usually a pretty good indicator that I have now been put into the asshole category. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. So, but even from that, right? So she is acting pissed off in a way,
Hmm.
and you then interpret that this is not just about you because of you, but
Hmm.
also because, you are inherently flawed, right? It's not even just that she's pissed off because I'm disappointing her right now by not being able
Right.
to do what she wants. It's because I am an inherently bad person who is always going to disappoint and always going to make everybody miserable just by my very existence, right?
Well,
You see the jump that happens there, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's
Yeah.
a huge leap.
Yeah, yeah. So in the moment when you have that initial thought, however it shows up, whether it's the verbalization of, see, I'm the bad guy, always the bad, whatever it is, stop there and notice if you can just see the bare blah 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 of the thought and recognize it for itself that it is just a thought. She has not explicitly stated it, nor is it explicitly true. Right?
Hmm.
We don't want to buy into the content of the thought. We just want to recognize that this is a reoccurring thought. You've heard it before. It's not the first time. It's not
Right.
not novel. So from there, you can then notice if, well, if holding it in the kind of containment of just recognizing it as thought and not buying into it, see if that changes the situation at all to begin with. If it doesn't, notice then what's going on in the body. What has it triggered? What has, has there been a cascade of, did it really stop with just that one thought, or were there further impressions that created that same, tableau of bad guy that we've been in so many times before? Here it is again. Recognize that. Again, not as being truth in the situation, but as being a habitual sensory reaction to that type of thought. It's not true. This is just the habitual experience in the body that happens when I see somebody else who is pissed off and I, immediately interpret that I'm the one you know, at fault here. Notice that this sensation is occurring, but it's not necessarily um, uh, labeled as anything at that point. Just recognize, just like you had the contentless sound of blah 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 blah, you have the contentless sensation of clench 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 or buzz 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 or whatever it is. Be with those. Also notice then, like if you have the moment to do it, to take that instant to turn it into another self-inquiry exercise. Because every one of those times is trying to point to the flawed, always bad self. So call its bluff.
Okay.
It's playing on the habitual belief that there is such a thing as a fundamentally bad Darrell. So in that moment, call its bluff and look for it. Okay, if we believe the content of the thought, what is that content of the thought pointing to? Who is the one who is bad or selfish or who always makes things worse? And in that moment, let it turn it around. Go
Hmm.
into that, like wherever that seems to be pointing, look there. If there's a sensation in the body that it's pointing to, look there. If there's a mental image of the Darrell who is always bad, look at that mental image and recognize if that really is Darrell. Whatever is showing up is a representation of what it thinks Darrell or the self is, or what it proposes that that is. So check every one of those to be convinced once again that it doesn't exist.
Hmm. That's I think that that's is sort of the next level or the next step in what I've been doing. And it's not every time, but oftentimes, you know, brought to my attention by feelings of discomfort,
Mm,
or being troubled or upset. In fact, it happened in that situation that I just described to you a moment ago,
right.
where when I recognize that total assumption, I know that, of course, I didn't see it then, but the assumption that she's upset
Yep.
and well, here it is. You're the one who's creating problems again. If it weren't for you, and the first thing that my mind went to was, well, that's just a thought.
Mm,
It's just a thought. I mean,
good.
I mean, where's the substance in that?
Yeah, exactly.
And then following on that, the next move was to go to the affirmations.
Yep. Also
Just
good.
kind of just a few minutes of just really feeling. saying those affirmations and really feeling them, which I've noticed here recently. I don't know when this started, but I've noticed for a while now when I do those affirmations, which I don't do as often as I used to, and I wish I did. But I've noticed that there is a feeling of truth or veracity or reality to them. In other words, when
Yeah.
when when those
Excellent.
when those things are said, it's like, yeah, that really is true. Sort of like saying, um, um, I don't know, I can't think of a good example, but because anything you can point to, the first thing I thought of was pointing to another country and saying, well, it's really there. Well, actually, no, it's not.
No.
So I can't think of a good example of something that you can't pull the rug out from underneath it.
Yeah.
But, if you can think of something that you can point to and go, yeah, that really has substance. It has that kind of quality to it of, yeah,
Yeah.
that really is true.
Yeah.
And when I started noticing, I was like, hey, that's great.
That's
Wow.
beautiful.
What a great development, you
Yeah.
know?
Excellent. Yep. And this is kind of the opposite side of that. So that was the sort of
Yes.
self-building side, and now we're looking at the self.
Well, we've got to see through it.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've got to see the ultimate underlying reality, see it for
Exactly.
what it really isn't.
Exactly. And ironically, you can do both practices, well, literally not simultaneously, but
No, but they don't. They're not in
effectively.
total contradiction.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, they're both serving different purposes, but they're both still very useful. And I would say even because we're negating the sense of self when we do the direct inquiry, we're also opening up for less resistance to doing the affirmations.
The resistance went away a long time ago. The
That's
resistance
great.
went away within months of starting that.
That's great.
I was surprised that that resistance didn't last very long.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, Before I forget, I do also want to play devil's advocate because it is always important to make sure we're staying on both sides of things.
Okay.
When you brought up the story about, Tuesday being, um, you know, pissed off at you because for her it seemed very, um, like an emergency, but you
Mm,
didn't feel it was, right?
right.
So keeping in mind that, like, it was funny because you used the phrase that, um, she chose to see it that way or something like that,
Hmm.
implying that she actually could choose to see something one way or another. So
Well, no, I don't think she can.
I know, but it's when we use those words, there are certain things that phrases kind of belie, right? They give away a little belief that we have somewhere in us. It might not be the foundational belief, but
Hmm.
it is still there. So
Okay.
one thing that we can do when we're in a situation also where, somebody needs us to do something and we also would like to or need to do something else, recognize that to the other person, it is just as real for them, especially if they're not doing this kind of work. It's even more real for them than what we feel like we need to be doing right now. And so there is a conflict of actual worldviews in that moment.
Hmm.
So for her, if we look at it from your perspective, you can say, well, she just wanted to go see her boyfriend and it really wasn't that important. For you, that's using your valuation of the situation and your interpretation of how important her seeing the boyfriend is and all of that, and your interpretation of what her experience of the moment is, which you don't have access to. There's an assumption baked into it that she's kind of exaggerating and overly manipulating things in order to get what she wants at an accelerated rate. But you don't have access to her internal world to know what her actual experience is like. So we can remember that and have that kind of humility when we're working with other people or dealing with other people to recognize that we actually have no idea what their internal experience is like, but it is most likely every bit as uh, real and emotionally uh, uh, dense and pers personally implicated as ours is. So
Right.
if now, you have the issue of, oh, but I was supposed to take care of something else around the house and now she wanted that. In your estimation, that thing that you were supposed to do has a lot of priority. But and it might be okay if you're putting out a fire in the house, that probably does. But there are things which, based on your perception of the situation, they are going to weigh heavier than the things that you perceive her needing. And in hers, she perceives what she sees as being a more, important thing than what you're doing. She doesn't understand from her perspective what it is that makes what you're doing so important, and you don't understand from your perspective what makes what she's doing or wants to do so important. So you are both working from two different competing worldviews in that moment. And effectively, what that calls us to do especially when we're doing this work, is to see if we can have the mm, more wide, compassionate worldview where we recognize that it is real to them. It feels every bit as real. Also, notice that what I'm doing here is only important to me from my viewpoint,
Right.
and that it's not a universal reality either. So we're kind of called to, and then from there, obviously, you're going to act however you're going to act and choose which one to do is going to happen, and choosing which one to do is going to happen and all of that. But just to kind of give us more of that sense of humility and compassion in our interactions with others, we can start to open up to that recognition that my worldview of what is important right now is, again, an identified, very limited perspective of what the needs of this moment actually are, or the importance things in this moment are. And they are often at odds with the perceptions of those around us.
Well, between all of the conversations you and I have had over time and some of the other um, um, formative ideas that have come my way over the years, um, there's frequently this sense of the other side, what you call the
Right.
devil's advocate of
Yep.
how things likely appear to the other person.
Yeah.
And I guess there's not an easy answer to this. It's something that will just have to get sorted out over time. But um, it kind of goes back to the whole thing about not being a doormat
Yeah.
and trying to recognize that you're taking care of your own genuine, legitimate needs, those things that will cause you problems. And
Yep.
I'd already had two or three or four instances of her in a period of about a week or two coming in and saying, "We've got to go now. It's
Yeah.
urgent." And then finding out it wasn't urgent. She was just all wound up like she tends to
Yeah.
get and have to stop everything and go and take her wherever. And like, okay, hold on a minute. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep just stopping whatever's happening in the house, even if it's not terribly important, and just go and do whatever she needs because that odds are that's going to run out of control before too long. So, there was this idea that it probably was a good idea to set a boundary and find a way to help her to understand that other people have things going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Have
so
you or Susanna? I know it's probably easier for Susanna to ask this than you, but um, when she's in one of those situations where it seems like an emergency, what it is that she's actually experiencing that makes it feel like an emergency?
I don't know. I'll have to ask Suzanne if she has. I don't know. That's a
Because
good question.
because it would be interesting to see how much of it is, and it might be that she is just actively manipulating you guys in doing it. It's
Mhm.
possible, but it also
Yep.
might be that for her, it genuinely feels like an emergency in that moment. And even though from your perspective, it doesn't look like one, you see the external reality of her going there. And, again, nobody's house was on fire. Nobody was getting arrested. There was nothing. It was obviously an emergency. But for her internally, it might. So getting her perspective on what she is actually experiencing, what does it really feel like? Why does it feel like an emergency to her now when it doesn't at other times? Can be really illuminating for everybody.
Okay. Hmm. All right. Huh. I'll have to ask Susanna about that. I don't know. Um, and sometimes it's hard to get an answer out of
Yeah.
Tuesday anyway. I mean, just
Yeah.
regardless. Um, but yeah, if anyone was going to, it'd be Susanna.
Yeah.
Um, there were two things that one, I just kind of wanted to make you aware of it, just to let you know there's been some progress here.
Nice.
Um, and the other one is more of a question, a kind of a how do you do this thing? So that last time we spoke and we discussed oh gosh, what was it? Oh yeah, it was the whole thing about a very young Darrell, little Darrell, not being heard and needing to be heard, um, and how that ties into and really has kind of been the foundation of all of the years of addiction. That seems to have made a noticeable dent, punched, even if it's a very small hole, punched a hole in that that dynamic structure process. Because
Yeah.
what's happened is that I don't know how well it's playing out with other things, but when it comes to um, and the reason I say that is because, for instance, if we just look at the whole caffeine thing,
Hmm.
um, just stopping it altogether might not be a good idea. I've done that before, and that can be debilitating.
Yeah.
That can, I mean, that can be really harrowing.
Yeah.
Um, Although, fortunately, my levels of use are not as completely out of hand as they used to be, so I don't know. But still, they're just, the voice of wisdom seems to say, well, let's not pull the plug on it all at once. Let's taper that down.
Yeah.
But right now, going through the withdrawals of this SSRI has kind of put all of that on hold. Anyway, having said that, what happened was immediately on the heels of that last time we spoke, what happened was when that voice for further doses of caffeine would show up later in the day, the ability to say no, no, thank you was effective in and of itself.
Mm.
And I stopped finding myself having to pull into a convenience store or wherever to get more caffeine. Now, it did happen, I think, two other times where the idea popped up and I was genuinely really tired, and so that voice won out. And there was
Mm.
a little concern there. I was like, okay, well, so maybe this has not been um, this process has not been interfered with or undone as much as I thought. But then, since then, every other time that that voice has come up, it hasn't happened.
Mm.
It can,
Yeah.
the other voice can say, no, no, thank you. Really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen. And there's not any resistance. There's not any need for resistance. There's not any struggle. It just simply is, no, not interested. And we go home without pursuing that.
Yeah.
Um, and so it seems to me, seems being the operative word, that something that seems like progress has happened with regard to, and I relate it to Fetters 4 and 5,
Mhm.
um, but that seems to have kind of, at least if nothing else, gotten a foot in the door, so that door is now at least cracked open.
Yeah. That is wonderful. That's really, really good news. Um, yeah. It's, everybody has kind of a different path towards it, and especially because this is a particularly complicated issue. It's somewhat,
Mm,
you've been using it for so long. I think it's not only performing a physical function of, giving a sense of energy and all of that because with everything you've been going on, but it provides the psychological function of, doing something yourself and all that. So I think it's been one that has been tied in with a lot of different hooks and you've been using it for a long time. So to have that kind of freedom from like, oh, the thought was there and then it doesn't get fulfilled and there's no resistance and that is huge. That's really amazing. And that's the same sort of thing, incidentally, just to circle back for a moment, that I was talking about when you say, when I talk about cleanly saying no to somebody about something, it's that same sort of thing where there's no residual feelings about it. It's that same just clear, oh,
Mm.
I had a thought about caffeine and I didn't follow through with it. Huh, cool. Oh, I can't do that thing oh, okay. And recognizing that, it is a factual matter of the moment that either I did not get caffeine or I got caffeine. I am taking them to the airport or I'm not. And then like that's the sort of the clean factual end of it. So really, really good. That's really, really good.
And that's the most noticeable place. I mean, there are other things that um, seem to indicate that something has been kind of, I don't know, undermined.
Hmm.
But because those things don't have quite the intensity of pull, where there's this, battle with it, this fight with it, and trying to resist it and not being able to resist it. But other little things like, I mean, I don't eat a whole lot to begin with.
Mm,
I mean, mainly I just eat dinner, and there, if I feel hungry, I might have, something small just to kind of keep the blood sugar up until it's time to eat later in the
yeah.
day. Um, but over the last month or so, that had started to increase, and I noticed that. I'm like, that's really just eating for the sake of eating. And
Mm,
once I noticed that, um, it automatically just started backing up from that on its own.
nice.
Whereas in the past, it would have been, well, that's eating for the sake of eating. Yeah. And then it would just keep on going, and now it was kind of interesting that there was this recognition of this doing something that really didn't serve any purpose other than probably some sort of pacification,
Yeah.
and it automatically backed up. I mean, there wasn't any kind of internal conversation, between two voices about this. I mean, nothing. It was just simply, I was just eating for the sake of eating. And then I noticed that
Amazing.
the next day, that automatically it had altered itself.
Yeah.
There was a point where the blood sugar was kind of, showing that there was an issue there. And like, okay, had a banana, we're done. I didn't need to go and have more. Or just
Yeah. Yeah.
simply had a banana, a little peanut butter, we're done. And
Yep.
that's pretty much how it's carried on since then. It's been much more restrained. Like, wow, that's great.
That's wonderful.
Fantastic. Not,
Yeah.
don't have to, play hostage to food.
Yep. Yeah, having an awareness without having awareness of what the body actually needs without having all of those uh the sort of attaching overlaying thoughts about it that are just constantly making it into something other than what it is or using it as a distractive device or
Yeah.
using it as a reward or something else. I mean, a lot of us we don't give ourselves the opportunity to just relax unless we are well, okay, I can allow myself to relax if I'm eating because like I can take that
Mm.
time for myself because I have to eat. It's a biological necessity. I can take time for myself if I have to go to the bathroom because that's a biological necessity. And anytime other than that, it's like so a lot of people end up eating just because it's like my me time when I can, without guilty conscience, take some time to myself and do this niceness for me. And we do all sorts of these, kind of mental gymnastics to make food into something that it's not, which is fundamentally sustenance, nutrition.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, I love that. Um, it's been really good actually this past, I forget how many months we've been doing it. We kind of took a break for it over the holidays, but we've started doing it again, doing these 36 to 40 hour fasts kind of regularly.
Oh yeah.
And it is. it is so good in the way that, well, I mean, obviously everybody's different. For some people, it just doesn't work for them, but the
Right.
body thankfully tends to react very well to it. Um, but it just changes the whole dynamic of how we normally think about eating and sensations in the body. And, um, it's also funny that like you can go, because like today I haven't eaten yet, today I haven't eaten since last night. And um, if it was going to be where I knew consciously that I was on a 36 or 40-hour fast, it's like there wouldn't really be any hunger or any thoughts of food because it's just, yeah, we're just not eating today. We're just drinking, fluids. Um, if there's a thought that, yeah, but when we get off this call, actually, I think we're gonna go have dinner, then that is like a different it primes the body in a way which is different. The situation is the
Yeah.
same. I'm sitting here not eating one way or
Mhm.
another, but the idea that eating is a possibility sets a whole different course in the system for the way that we are, anticipating food, thinking about food, feeling feelings of hunger in the body that are like priming for it to happen. None of that is necessarily relevant. If the context was that I'm just not eating today, it just goes away. It's all mind created, and it's
Yeah.
really interesting to kind of play with and to just explore and
Yeah.
notice how different changes in thought change the actual feelings in the body of whether I feel hungry or not, how I interpret that feeling of empty stomach. Is it, oh my God, I'm starving and I have to get something quick? Or is it just, oh, actually feels kind of good. There's a little bit light, but there's more meat in
Yeah.
my stomach than it usually is. It's all up to our interpretation, and it's really, really fascinating.
Well, I don't know how it happened, but I've gotten to a point over the last year or so, maybe longer, that feeling full is really unpleasant. When I eat enough that I feel full, it's like, oh God, I just feel weighted down. It's like I
Yeah.
almost feel bloated. God, don't do that again.
Yeah, yeah, completely. I went through a bad phase years ago because I think it was about 7 years that I did intermittent fasting. And it had gotten
Yeah.
to the point where I was only eating in like a 2-hour window a day. And I was packing so much food into that 2-hour window. And it was like I was like physically like, felt sick after eating, but it was like,
Right.
but I gotta get a salad and I gotta get some oats and I gotta get some beans and I gotta get, and it was like all these checklists that I had to get in a day, but I could only squeeze them in that 2 hours. So here we go. And it was like, being grotesquely overfull and it was not healthy.
Ooh.
It was a bad
Oh.
idea. So we live and we learn.
Yeah. Well, hopefully,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean
yeah,
that kind of readaptation is seems to be becoming more there's a greater possibility for potential for it now than there was, say a few years ago.
yeah, yeah.
So the other thing that came up was in the last, I don't know, few weeks, I guess maybe the last month or so, there are times where, and this isn't anything unusual, I'm sure. I'm sure everyone walking this path, eventually this becomes part of their experience to whatever degree. But there will be moments where it's just there's seeing, there's a visual field, there are hands moving in it, there's a voice talking, and
Yeah.
that's it. There's nothing added to it. And when that happens, oftentimes there's this kind of sense of surprise, like, oh, there it is,
Yeah.
and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But and actually, one that happened last week was kind of the a step beyond that, in that it started with that, but and this happened in just a matter of seconds. It went from that to this recognition of um, kind of wheels within wheels. This okay, so this is a process, and it's within this process, which is within
Mhm.
that process, and it wasn't, oh, I'm one with everything, but I could
Yeah,
see how somebody could misconstrue it as that. It was just
yeah,
simply, wow, there's this process, and that's part of this process, which is part of,
Yeah.
and it's all one big thing. It's just one
Yeah.
big process with little micro processes within it.
Yeah.
And I just kind of took that in for a second. It was just kind of this awareness of it. And what that led to was this idea that maybe there is some value in trying to practice and engender that awareness.
Yeah.
And for a couple of days, there were thoughts about, well, how would you practice that? How would you try to cultivate or engender that that broader impersonal perspective? And I never could come up with anything that
Oh, yeah.
really seemed to work.
Yeah, I feel like I try to point to that pretty frequently. Some of my
You do.
inquiries, but also the book that I'm in the later state editing stages of, hopefully.
Hmm,
There's a lot of that in it because and obviously everybody's different for what kind of clicks for them.
sure.
I find the perspectives of interlocking, like well, I like your wheels within wheels metaphor. I think that's really nice. I tend to use a lot of the sort of considering the atomic structure or the subatomic structure of everything in the way that that is, you know, completely the same, right? The if the
Hmm.
quantum field theory is correct, then we have all these different fields which are underlying everything. There's an electron field and all these different fields. And if that is the case, there's absolutely no difference in on that level from a human being, a wall, a car, a
Right.
black hole, whatever. Everything is made from this same enormous field or overlapping fields. Um, so there is a connection there, which is undeniable. We can also zoom into our level of experience where we can see picking like there are some of those Buddhist practices where before you eat, if you're going to eat an apple, you picture all of the causes and events that led to that apple making your way to your plate, so that you also it engenders a sense of gratitude for the farmers and the sun and the dirt and the microorganisms and everything that has allowed you to eat this one single apple in this one
Hmm.
case. But it also shows you how completely interconnected the entire cycle is. That
Right.
apple would not exist without not only that particular tree and not only the entire infrastructure that we have in this country at least with getting an apple from halfway across the world to our plate. Um,
Right.
but uh, even if it was just, an apple from your backyard, thinking about all of the sunlight and the humidity and the rain and like I said, the mycelium and the microorganisms in the dirt and the
Generations of trees.
generation exactly each generation successive generation of tree that tree spawned from and like all of these things are playing into that apple being here right now. And you can do the same thing with this body and think all of the different factors that have led to this body being the way that it is and stretching back into the generations of generations that, your parents and your grandparents and great grandparents and all of those spiraling back, any number of those parts of the chain could have been affected for you not to exist right now. The
Hmm.
fact that every movement that you make is, when I do this with my hand, it's pushing air molecules out of the way that are affecting other air molecules. And,
Huh.
we like to go through life like we are in this completely, autonomous or not autonomous, but isolated kind of,
Independent.
huh?
Independent.
Yeah, yeah, good. Independent being who's just walking through the world and, doing its own things. And the fact is that we are just as much in a like, you can see fish underwater and you can see the water and you can see if a whale goes through the water that it pushes the water out of the way and the effect that it has on the other fish nearby and all of that. And it's very
Right.
possible to us. We're in exactly the same situation here. We're just in gas instead of water. And so
Right.
we're moving this gas out of the way with every bit that we move. And I am inhaling this gas and exhaling this gas. And everybody on Earth, I mean, they say like by molecule that, every inhalation we take, there is some trace element of molecules which have been exhaled from, every famous person you can imagine throughout history.
Right.
The 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 fact is that we are all interconnected on that level too. And we can, kind of use the imagination in those ways to engender that feeling of connectivity that everything that we look at as being me is completely conditioned by everything that has come before and everything that is currently the way that it is now. I mean, if all of a sudden all of the oxygen just disappeared in this room, I would not be the way that I am right now.
Right.
Right? Like this is all dependent on everything being fine-tuned exactly the way that it is.
Hmm.
Our the physicists talk about the fundamental laws of nature, which or this universe, which have been, so finely tuned that that's why some people say that there had to be like an intelligence involved to, make
Right.
this balanced. Also, other scientists say that if they weren't, we just wouldn't exist to know that they are that way because there could be other millions of universes where they're not finely tuned that way and no life exists in order to know that, the laws of universe are not finely tuned in a way that allowed life to exist elsewhere. So it, the fact is that there are so many aspects of the world, the universe as we currently understand it, which are so um, very precariously balanced that keep things being the way that we are, that we can have that sense of humility, awe, and gratitude that we are alive right now in this universe with the way that things are. Even all the things that we would rather be different. They are the way that they are because everything is the way that it is. And we would not be the way that we are right now if all of those things in the world that we, you know, hate, feel are unjust, and would rather get rid of, if they weren't the way that they are right now, we also would not be exactly as we are right now. And they wouldn't be the way that they are right now if we weren't the way that we are right now. We're we are all co-creating all of this. So the more ways that we can kind of use the imagination to go through this in all these different, levels can really help. Hopefully that kind of, as we're doing this, it's not just a mental exercise. And hopefully we can kind of feel that greater sense of connection as we do it because, there are tons of scientists and other people who know these things logically, but it doesn't have any real impact on them because it's not interpreted that way.
Right. Well, it's funny that that was the answer that you gave because my mind went somewhere completely different. And it wasn't really, I don't know, I don't know if I'd call it a practice, but what started happening was, and it really was, it kind of goes back to where we started with this conversation, because there wasn't any thought beyond how can this, how how can a person practice seeing this, having this perspective, and automatically in the following days, what would happen is um, when it was noticed that there was a sense of someone viewing or doing
Mm.
that, automatically it would be a question of, okay, so what's creating a sense of someone here?
Yeah.
And kept looking for that and kept looking for that and kept looking for that. And finally, at one point in doing that, we kind of caught the bugger. It's like, oh, so it's this little, it's this very quick moment. I mean, it's just a flash and it's gone
Yeah.
of this somewhere between a thought and I guess an assumption is really still thought, but that's the way it struck me at the time was somewhere between a thought and an assumption is this idea that there's someone here. And it's not really thought, it's more felt. It's more
Yep.
felt that there's someone here, and that's what gives the sense of veracity
Yeah.
to of someone being here.
Yeah. Well,
And when I caught that, it was nice because it was kind of this aha, it's kind of like we see, it's like we're seeing even more clearly still. you
Yeah,
know.
that's
Um,
amazing.
and that's just kind of where it has rested since then. It's just a sense of someone being there. Okay, well, how does that happen? What is it that makes it seem like there really is someone there? We
Yeah,
need to
exactly.
find that.
Exactly. I love that. And then the other thing too is you can isolate if you want to get to that thing that you had said where, it just seems like the body is moving and words are coming out and all of that. You can practice doing specific movements just to see, like if I'm doing this with my hand, does it feel like I'm intentionally in control of the hand? And if so, then exactly what you said, what part of experience right now makes me feel like I am intentionally moving the hand this way? Where is that sense of control coming in? Where's that sense of anticipation or knowing that it's happening or how it's happening or how I can do it? But then also just if you like view the hand moving as though you're like looking out of a porthole at, this other alien thing, you
Uh-huh.
very quickly kind of shift your perspective to
Yeah.
it's not my hand doing the thing, it's just this weird, and I mean, babies do that all the time, right? I don't think they're thinking that this is my hand, but they're like, moving their hand
Marveling at it.
around,
Yeah.
marveling at it. I think it's the same basic thing that it's like movement is happening. We're just kind of fascinated by the movement, but recognizing that the feeling of an arm moving is not necessarily even lined up with the visual aspect of the arm moving,
Hmm.
right? Is the sensation even happening exactly where the arm seems to be in the visual field?
Hmm.
And if you start to put attention on that, it can start to break down sometimes the consistency or the seeming consistency of it really being an arm which is moving. And instead, the more attention you pay to it, you can start to get a cloud of sensations, of physical sensations that we'll call movement, and then also a visual uh, representation of, color and shape that we ordinarily recognize as an arm. And if we take the my arm out of it and just recognize what we're really seeing in direct experience, we're seeing movement of color and shape
Hmm.
and somewhere related, but maybe not really in the same place, we're feeling a sensation of physical movement happening. And that perception of those two things kind of becoming slightly detached from each other can be happening sort of out there for now, for lack of a better word, and then recognize that in here, again, for lack of a better term,
Hmm.
there's not really any connection to that movement. There's no internal sensation that I can point to, which is in some way um, uh, to be credited with the movement of the arm, or that knows when the arm is going to move one direction or another, or that can anticipate it or even stop it. That you can just recognize the automaticity of the arm moving, and you can have a thought of stop, and the arm keeps going,
Yeah.
right?
I remember the first time that happened to me. And that was years ago. That was the most mind-boggling thing. Why won't my hand stop?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not under control the way we think it is.
Yeah.
I can have a thought about, flying up to the ceiling and the body's not going to respond to that, right? It can't.
Right.
I can have a thought that says stop moving of the arm, and the arm is not necessarily bound to actually putting that into action.
Well, that's a good exercise actually. When I can sit by myself for a while, I'm going to do that
Yeah,
because when I can put all of my attention on that, because I'm hearing your voice as I'm doing that, and
yeah,
so it's kind of split. But when I can do
yeah,
nothing but that, um, um, I, I think I think that will be fruitful.
yeah. Another one, if you have the up, like, I mean, you can do it with literally anything. I know one that was fun was doing it on. think it was on the exercise bike. It was one of the gym machines at one point. It was doing, I think, on the exercise bike, and just noticing that like there's a visual of legs doing this, but it was at a point that I didn't feel any like, physical like I'm whole body struggling to do this thing. It was like legs are just kind of doing that thing, and it did, it's just huh, curious. It was completely detached from the actual movement itself. Um, yeah. So you can do it with lots of different things. It doesn't just have to be, one repetitive movement, but we can
No, but
go through life and yeah,
it seems like, whether it's your hand, an arm, or something else, it seems like if you can give that your full attention and kind of do with that what that thing that it seems like most people stumble into that thing of if you just say a word over and over and over,
yeah,
eventually it breaks down and loses its meaning. Same
yeah,
kind of thing. If you can just give that your full attention and work with
yeah,
that, then, like you said, the visual and felt part, um, can begin to separate and you
yeah,
start to see more clearly what's going on,
yeah,
what's actually
exactly,
happening there.
exactly.
One other thing, real quick.
Yep.
Um, it was that last email you sent me there. I was going through it and there was something in there that wasn't quite clear.
Okay.
And I may not be able to find it again, but
I may not be able to clarify
yeah, well, there's that too.
it.
um, oh, I know what it was. Okay, this is simple. But you said, like we've talked about, it might also be helpful to meet the stories where they are. And when I read that at first, I thought, okay, there's just this assumption of understanding it. And then I realized, hold on, what does he really mean by that? So I know it may seem like an obvious thing, but what does that mean when you see meet the stories where they are?
Can you give me the rest of the context of the statement of what I said around it? Just
Okay. Well, the previous paragraph, because that's right at the beginning of this next paragraph, but the previous paragraph is um, funny thing is, I'm kind of jumping in the middle
yeah.
of the previous paragraph. Funny thing is, over 30 years later, I still sometimes hear the same.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This guitar pop to mind. Typically in moments when it seems like there are a lot of things to be done, the bodily state is similar. It triggers an old loop which is no longer relevant. It's possible in some ways to see that this is what is happening for you. Like we've talked about, it might also be helpful to meet the stories where they are and retrain the brain with the positive affirmations.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So,
So,
I mean, when I thought about that, I realized I'm not really sure I truly understand what that means.
so in that case, I was talking about treating them as sort of at face value, as though they're real.
Oh,
Right.
okay. All
Right.
right.
So if it is believed that I am a bad guy who is really, not worthy, then use the positive affirmations to retrain that bad guy at that level.
I see.
Right. So it's take them at face value as one option. It's not the only option, obviously. And we talked about, undermining it also today. But it's one thing to, okay, so I hear you. I'm a terrible person. Well, then also I love myself, and I'm absolutely okay with the fact that I'm also selfish. Like being okay. So meet it at face value what it is. And then also, like we did earlier, undermine the whole thing by going, okay, well, what exactly am I pointing to? Or is that thought pointing to when it says that I am a certain way? And then turn it around, find it, try to find it.
Oh, so when you see what is it pointing to, I understood it, but I can't actually say it in words. So
Yeah.
when
So
you say what it's pointing to, in other words, that it's, for lack of a better way of putting this, it's as if saying I'm the problem, I'm the bad
yeah,
guy. Everything
yeah,
would be better, everything would be okay if it weren't for me. Okay, so that's a giant neon arrow pointing to what's in that space where the arrow is pointing. What's there?
yeah, yeah,
So, okay.
exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, we're the I is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that statement, right? Is it the
Uh,
physical form? Is it the pattern of thoughts? Is it the pattern of external behaviors that we call Darrell? Is it um yeah,
all of the above.
all of the above, well, right? So we have to, instead of just taking all of these things at face value all the time, like we normally do. Um, make them make them have to be specific. Like we're kind of I'm anthropomorphizing them a bit, but you know, make them uh be more specific about what they are supposedly pointing to when they say that I am a bad guy. All right, prove your work, as a math teacher would say. Show me exactly how you get to that how you got to that conclusion. And what is the one who is here consistently all the time, who is consistently bad in every situation? What are we talking about? The physical form, which without being animated by, again, the life force and oxygen and water and food, the physical form is not a bad thing, right? It doesn't have any problematic behaviors to speak of. The
Right,
physical form can't act on its own. So is it the pattern of behaviors that happens to be associated with that? But those patterns of behaviors are very cherry picked, right? We can't talk about every behavior that a person has ever had as being bad. It's very unlikely that they have never done a single kind, nice, generous, thoughtful thing, right?
right.
We're we're being uh, way too overly general with these ideas about I in any way. We can say, okay, maybe there are aspects of behavior which are socially maladapted. There are some things that, yes, we can stand to improve. Everybody can. It's not about deciding that I am perfect with all of my faux pas and, anger issues and everything else, but to recognize that when I extrapolate out and say that because I am somebody who has had a history of anger issues, I am now a terrible person who should never be around anybody. That is just unfair to everyone involved, right? That is an over exaggeration. It's not based on anything real, but the mind is habitually jumping to that over exaggeration. Like, oh, well, I guess I am just the problem then, all situations. And then, fine. It gets taken on as this instant belief, and then um, it never gets it never gets scrutinized the way that it should to find out how much of that could possibly be true.
From idea to identity, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly right. I love
Ah, wow. I mean, that's really remarkable. Um, I mean, it helps me to understand. I mean, I understood it, but there was always kind of this gray area for me when I would hear Pernilla say, you're making something out of nothing.
yeah,
But rephrasing it like that from idea to identity, it makes it clearer how,
I love that.
there's this huge chasm of a leap
Yeah,
from that to that.
yeah, exactly. Love that.
Hmm. Um, well, I was glad to hear you say that you're working on the book that you're working on. I mean, you
Yeah,
mentioned something about it before in the last couple of months.
yeah,
So, because I'd asked you something and you said, "Well, I'm actually doing just that thing." So,
yeah.
uh, but
It,
I'm
oh,
glad to hear you say that you're in the later editing stages
thank
because
you.
I'm kind of looking forward to that. Just because, yeah, obviously these conversations have been immeasurably beneficial. I mean, it can't be overstated just
Yeah,
how life-changing all of this has been. Um, so all that to say is transmission of these ideas by verbal communication is unquestionably effective. Yet at the same time, things can be understood, for me anyway, things can be understood in a new way or maybe clarified when they're read.
yeah, yeah,
Written
yeah,
word, it's just because, I mean, I was reading by the time I think I was reading by the time I was 5. I mean, I hadn't
yeah,
started school
yeah,
yet. I was
yeah,
already
yeah,
reading. So, I've got this, I mean, that from my near earliest years, all of this reading. So that
yeah,
it, going to make sense that that's going to, there's conditioning there for that to get into the system in a way that other things might not, or in a way that they might not. So,
And
uh,
it's also we get a chance to reread paragraphs over and over again.
yeah,
It really kind of has a chance to settle and click, or like, I don't think oh, okay, let me go back through that again. And yeah,
for one, I'm looking forward to it,
thank
and
you.
of course I have the advantage of I've gotten very real, genuine, substantial results from doing this. And then I live with somebody who has seen the change themselves, and they can say,
Yeah.
yeah, this is not the same person I was living with 2.5 years ago.
Yep.
This stuff
Love
is
that.
real. It works.
Yep.
You have to do the work, but you'll get the results if you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Love it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, somebody's letting me know she needs to go outside. So,
Okay, and there we go. So
all right, man.
have a good one. This is good
Take
seeing you.
care.
Good luck with
Yeah, it's
everything.
good
You
talking.
too.
Good seeing you. All right. Talk
Bye.
to you later.